Everyone, Zeddy here again today with a brand new video, and yesterday we took a look at the standard meta report for November 2020, and now we are going to take a look at the wild one. So the Evocation nerf and Prime nerf went live, and how has that impacted? Well, not a heck of a lot, but we'll take a look at how things have been developing, because there is one new deck in Tier 1 that just came out of nowhere for the most part. And yeah, the meta outside of that is pretty stale, pretty similar to what we've seen for a very long time, but that's going to happen in an internal format, in a wild format. Things are a lot less likely to change, but we'll see what happens with the new expansion. Hopefully things get spiced up, because personally, I've been playing a ton of wild. It just hasn't been that dynamic or interesting for me, but yeah, I'm hoping the next expansion can change that up. So let's take a look at the meta report. Again, we evaluate decks on a 3-tier basis, Tier 1, 2, and 3. Tier 1 being the best of the best decks in the format, Tier 2 being very strong, but not quite as good as Tier 1, and Tier 3 being a bit more of like those fringe decks and maybe we just want to highlight something unique. So let's get going. Let's take a look at the Tier 1 wild decks. So starting off, we have yet again, for yet another month, I have to give it its due, Reno Priest is still the king of wild. You have Raza, you have Anduin, and more importantly, you have Lorekeeper Polkelt to tutor these out. You get your Anduin, you get your Raza, you remove the board, you heal up with Reno, and then you finish your opponent off with your Spawn of Shadows combo. And this deck just does incredibly well. It beats up on aggro. It has almost no bad matchups. There's very few bad matchups out there for it. You have like Quest Mage, there's a couple others out there, but for the most part, a lot of those matchups have just been neutralized by like hyper aggression and other stuff like that, which Reno Priest can deal with. So yeah, if you're queuing ladder and you're not playing Reno Priest, it almost feels like a mistake, except for the next deck we're going to talk about, which honestly might be better, but I got to give it a little bit more time to evaluate that. And what is that deck? That is Pain Zoo Warlock. That's right, Dark Glare Warlock is back, and it is all over the place right now at High Legend ladder. There's people that have hit like rank 1 Legend, I believe, on NAU and Asia, all with this deck. It has just been refined back to the point where Dark Glare seems to be absolutely busted. So you're highlighting the latest list that I've been seeing lately, and yeah, you could tell that Dark Glare, it's curved out way lower than it used to when it was 3 mana. There's literally nothing over 2 mana in this deck other than Ascent Demons, Loatheb, and Giants. So the objective just before, like before, is get Dark Glare out there. You want to raise dead and get some, raise dead and bring back like Emerald Reaver, Flame Imp, Cobalt Librarian, Pen Flingers. You basically all the 1-drop stuff. We even have like Cheeky Ankle Biter in there. Anything that can damage yourself, and it's all 1 mana or less for the most part. Spam them, and then all of a sudden your Flesh Giants, your Molten Giants are playable, and then you can just slam down Cult Neophyte, you can slam down Loatheb, and you have a board of Giants, but like turns 3, 4, or 5, and very few decks can compete with that. And it is getting to the point where it's feeling basically like the old Dark Glare Warlock deck. People are consistently getting Giants out on turns 3, 4, and 5 and locking their opponents out, creating non-game situations. So yeah, if this deck continues to trend the way it is, it's going to go back to like that Tier S category where basically Dark Glare Warlock beats everything except for maybe a perfect drawing Highlander Priest or maybe Odd Warrior, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So yeah, Pain Zoo Warlock is back, Dark Glare is back, and it's looking incredibly powerful yet again. And as I mentioned in This Week in Hearthstone, it'll be interesting to see if this gets adjusted again, if it trends the way it is, because, I mean, if it was a problem before, and it's doing the exact same thing as before, you think they might want to take a look. But who knows? It's Blizzard. You never know what they want to do. And the last Tier 1 deck we're going to take a look at is Aggro Druid. This is built, around Embiggen, all that stuff, vomiting tokens, buffing them up, and winning with Savage Roar. So, you see here, nothing too much has really changed with Aggro Druid. There's Glacial Shards thrown into the mix, basically, probably to help with the Dark Glare matchup. You can freeze Giants. That's one way that you can get really neutralized by Dark Glare Warlock. And yeah, you want to get your early game. You want your Bloodsail Corsair. You want your Gibberling. You want Embiggen. And just play it, buff it up with Mark of the Lost, Power of the Wild, and, burst your opponent down with Savage Roar. You have the main reason this deck is playable with such an absurdly low curve of basically 2 mana or less outside of Savage Roar is Voracious Reader. The 2 mana Jeeves just lets you vomit your hand and then fill your hand back up. And especially when you play cards like Embiggen or Markelos, you also buff your Voracious Reader, making it pretty hard to kill in the early game. It has 3 health, and then it goes up above that. So yeah, it's a very flexible, incredibly aggressive deck. It has the most turn 4 or 5 lethals in the game, and just punishes anything remotely slow. And even like a Reno Priest, which is probably one of its worst matchups, if they don't have that perfect early AoE, they just get blown out. So it can high roll anything. It's incredibly just fast, aggressive, and does a lot of good stuff. And it's basically seems to be the choice of deck when people are trying to climb to legend quickly is Aggro Druid. At tier 2, we have Quest Mage, good old-fashioned Quest Mage. You have your Sorcerer's Apprentice, Flamewaker, you have your Giants, all the usual garbage. Evocation, in my opinion, is still worth running. I saw some people cutting it. I don't think that's the right call. Evocation, even if it's 1 mana with your Apprentice, still giving you a ridiculous amount of spells for high rolling. But because it's 2 mana, because the deck is slowed down a bit, and because Pain Warlock has come back, I can't really call this a tier 1 deck. I still think it's relatively meta warping, but not as much. It still is relatively meta warping. The second the meta is not hyper aggressive, Quest Mage, again, would just take over because it just doesn't lose to anything slow. It still beats Reno Priest, although not as convincingly because of my cards like Mindrender Lucia, but it's still heavily favored. And yeah, beats up on any slower deck. The thing is, the wild meta is so aggressive, whether it be through like a Dark Lair Warlock or Aggro Druid or basically all the other decks we're going to talk about outside of maybe like 1 or 2, the meta is hyper aggressive, and a lot of that is like you can't really not be hyper aggressive, or else Quest Mage will then always find a way. It's always that check in place for if anything greedy or fun wants to be played, you just can't because Quest Mage will just crap all over it. So yeah, Quest Mage, I don't know if it's the greatest pick in the meta right now, if it's very aggressive, but if you find just even the slowest or medium of pockets out there, you can just slam Quest Mage and win games. You're finding a lot of Reno Priest, just play Quest Mage, you'll beat up on them. And of course, it could still scam the aggressive decks, but it gets a little bit harder when Evocation costs 2 instead of 1 because you just can't scam them quite as quickly. But still, it's old-fashioned Quest Mage. It can still rob people. It still does a lot of random, and it just does an absurd amount of stuff if you give it any time at all. The next deck we're going to take a look at, I believe, was tier 1 last month. I got it down to tier 2 now, and that's Paladin. Still really good. Still clicking that button can do a lot of work. There's only so many AoEs in the world for Reno Priest to hit them with, but still, it is definitely favored Reno Priest. Like I said, Reno Priest is like favored against everything, so for the most part, you know, it still, you know, has that issue, but you know, that button value at the beginning of the game can be incredible. You can get your Righteous Cause side quest down, getting a really good early buff. You can run Ironbeak Owl to get through like big taunts, like if a Pain Warlock taunts up Giant, or you get a Void Lord coming down in your way. Does a lot of good work, but it's Paladin. You click the button, you buff up your dudes with Quartermaster, go face with Leroy, you have weapons like Rallying Blade and Unidentified Maul. Just does a lot of good work. It's very consistent, relatively easy to play, and yeah, cards like Tour Guide, more recent editions, have just made, you know, clicking that button even easier, which is always an asset to a Baku-based deck. And the last tier 2 deck we'll take a look at is another staple that's been doing really well in Wild, but fallen off just because other decks have been more popular, and that's Discard Warlock. Nothing really has changed with it. It's still the same old deck. You have, you know, you have your Hand of Gul'dan, which if you play out your Expired Merchant, you play out your Nightshade Matron, will draw you 3 cards. This build I'm highlighting here even has Dark Glare in it, so you can utilize Raise Dead, Flame Imp, Cobalt Librarian to, you know, get some mana cheat turns in there. Not to the extent that you see in the other lists, because you're not cheating out Giants, so you don't want to self-damage too much. And then, of course, you know, you can buff up your Tiny Knight of Evil, cheat out Civil War Golem, go face with Jiraxis. Doom Guards are always really good at going face and discarding stuff, and then, of course, you have the Prime in there as well for reload. Just a really super crazy hyper-aggressive deck that just cycles. You basically go to be fatiguing before you hit 10 mana crystals. This deck draws so much, and you know, you just gotta dodge Reno Priest or some of the other aggressive decks that might be able to outpace you, but still a really good pick, can still do a lot of good work in Wild. Next, we'll take a look at the tier 3 decks, and I have been mentioning a lot of aggressive archetypes, so how do you want to, you know, counter these aggressive archetypes if you don't want to play, like, say, Reno Priest? Well, Odd Warrior is a good pick. Odd Warrior here, highlighting a list, it's just pure removal. People were trying out the whole, like, Shield Slam Silas combo where you play your 1/4 and Shield Slam. It's not good. It's just not good in Odd Warrior. Like, you have to reliably have a lot of armor. You have to draw those cards, and Odd Warrior doesn't have a heck of a lot of draw. It's just, the deck just doesn't work with that combo, but it does work as a deck that absolutely dunks on aggro, whether it be Aggro Druid. It could do well against Dark Lair Warlock because you have a lot of AoEs, a lot of clears. And yeah, you run into Reno Priest, you're going to be in trouble because they could just outdamage you. You run into Quest Mage, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to run into any deck with a realistic win condition, you're going to be in trouble. But if you're facing a lot of aggro, which the meta is very aggressive, awDWARRIOR is still a really good way to go and has done a lot of good work. And, this build here is actually a little bit different. We have an awDWARRIOR build that's running the Risky Skipper Eternium Rover combo. So you have Ankar, Risky Skipper, and you can combo with Eternium Rover, and you have Blood Boil Brutes to cheat them out. This list is just tailored just to dunk on aggro. Your only real way of trying to beat up on a non-aggro deck is milling them with Brand Coldlight Oracle. If they're not watching their hand size, you can Brand Coldlight Oracle and try and mill a combo piece, something like that. But otherwise, you're not really going to have a good time against any long-term deck. You don't really have any way to combat that, and that's not what awDWARRIOR is about. You're just trying to punish aggro, so give that a go if you really want to beat up on all the aggro decks you keep on seeing. Speaking of beating up on aggro, we have Reno Lock as well. I'm highlighting an Archwitch Willow Demon Cheating mix, as well as an anti-Reno Priest deck. This is probably a little too teched out, but I thought it was kind of spicy, kind of fun. It's pretty budget conscious. There's only 15 legendaries in here, so, you want to give it a go. But anyways, Reno Lock is pretty decent in the meta. You can beat up on aggro because you have removals. You have, Defile, Corrupting Mist. You have, Lord Godfrey, and of course you have Reno Jackson and Zephyrus to either give you insane heal or, remove the board. But we got some techs in here. You've got Grizzled Wizard and Sir Finley that can neutralize a Reno Priest's hero power, as long as they don't Dirty Rat or Lucia, one of these combo pieces early in the game. And then you also have the Darkness to put candles into your opponent's deck to neutralize that. I don't really recommend that at all, but I thought it was pretty spicy. But yeah, Reno Lock can do a lot of good stuff against the aggressive decks, but at the same time, it's not as consistent against aggro as awDWARRIOR because, well, you only have one-ofs, and if they don't line up right, it's not going to work great. And because Reno Lock is so tech-based with cards like Finley, Grizzled Wizard, you might end up with a really bad dead hand against aggro. So play at your own risk. You definitely do some good stuff. You could actually have a chance against most matchups outside of Quest Mage or something. But yeah, have a go with it. And again, have some fun. This is a really, really expensive list, but it looks really fun and stupid to play. And lastly, we'll just highlight a little bit more of a budget-friendly deck and a little bit more consistent. And there's just better aggro options in my opinion, but it's still solid, and that's awDRogue. awDRogue is still performing very well. There's a lot of people that think it's tier 2, near tier 1. I'm more on the tier 3 side of things, but awDRogue, you get your 2 damage dagger, you have Tour Guide, one of the more recent additions, you have Wand Thief to get mage spells, you have Lackeys, you have Toxin Blade and Cutting Class to give you some cycles, Secret Passage, 1-mana sprint's always good, Vile Spine to eliminate stuff, and Leroy to go face. It's awDRogue, but again, it's reliable, it's solid, it's an aggressive deck that always feels like one of the more honest aggressive decks. And that's kind of why I never feel like it's that amazing is, if you answer their early Henge Clan on their board, it's pretty easy to lock them out. But again, it does very well for a lot of people. Just don't see it as that top tier deck. So there you have it, the meta report for WoW for November 2020. Our next meta report will come in December. We'll have a new expansion and hopefully a whole lot of different decks to talk about. Probably more likely to happen in Standard WoW, but fingers crossed that the meta will shape up a little bit more in Wild. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Have a great day. Stay salty, my friends.